The late comedian George Carlin was a keen observer of the human condition. Many of his routines focused on the idiosyncrasies and foibles of regular people in day-to-day living. For example, as Cynthia Briggs Kittredge has recently pointed out, in one of his monologues, Carlin's razor-sharp wit focused on our tendency to become obsessive about the accumulation of material things. Carlin began by asking, "You got your stuff with you?" "I'll bet you do. Guys have stuff in their pockets, women have stuff in their purses. Stuff is important. You got to take care of your stuff. You got to have a place for your stuff. That's what life's all about, trying to find a place for your stuff. That's all your house is, a place to keep your stuff. If you didn't have so much stuff, you wouldn't need a house. You could just walk around all the time. A house is just a pile of stuff with a cover on it. You can see that when you're taking off in an airplane," he said. "You look down and see all the piles of stuff. Everybody's got his own little pile of stuff," said Carlin. For Jeanette and me, this coming Friday is our 39th wedding anniversary. And I can still remember several weeks later, we moved from Jeanette's parents' house in Michigan to Beaumont, Texas to begin my seminary internship. At that time, as newlyweds, we didn't have much stuff, of course. In fact, everything we owned in the world fit comfortably in a 5-foot by 8-foot cargo trailer that we pulled behind our Volare station wagon. 9 months later, when the internship came to an end, some friends from the congregation where I served down in Beaumont, who were headed out on an antique buying trip on the East Coast, offered to take our stuff to my parents' house up here in Freehold. But a couple of months after that, when we both had gotten jobs and were headed to upstate New York, we again had to make the move ourselves. Only by this time, we had acquired some more stuff. And so now we needed to rent a 10-foot truck instead of a trailer. And then 2 years after that, for our move from Middletown, New York, back to the seminary in Columbus, Ohio, and because we had once again accumulated more stuff, the move required a 15-foot rental truck. A year later, the move from Columbus to Gibsonburg, Ohio for my second seminary internship necessitated a 17-foot truck. And a year after that, the move from Gibsonburg to my first call down in Maysville, Kentucky required a 20-foot truck. Do you see a pattern emerging here? 4 years later, with a 2-year-old daughter in tow and all the stuff that you acquire after you become parents, the move to Piscataway, New Jersey for my second call now required a 26-foot truck, which is actually the largest truck that U-Haul rents. And so needless to say, 10 years after that, when we made the move from Piscataway to Pottstown, Pennsylvania for my next call, we had completely outgrown truck rentals and do-it-yourself moves. This time with 2 more daughters in tow and all of their accompanying stuff as well, we now required a commercial moving company and a moving van. Funny thing though, the salesperson who had estimated the size and weight of all that stuff that we were moving to Pottstown apparently underestimated. Long story short, about halfway through the day, as the movers were loading up and moving in that they had brought with them, they realized that it wasn't large enough. And so they called for a second truck, and later that night back at their terminal, they then had to consolidate the stuff from these 2 smaller trucks onto a single larger one. And it's been moving vans ever since, from Pennsylvania to Georgia, from Georgia to Ohio, from Ohio back here to New Jersey. But here's the thing, my own pet theory, if you will. Just as human beings reproduce, I totally believe that stuff reproduces as well. The experience of my own life is a perfect example. When Jeanette and I started out 39 years ago, everything we had in the world, all of our worldly possessions, fit nicely into a 5x8 trailer with the little room left over even. 3 children and 11 moves later, it took an entire moving van to get us here. And that's not counting the truck we rented as well, just to move my office, all my books and papers. Well, it's pretty obvious to me, no doubt about it. Stuff also reproduces. But that's not even the half of it. As George Carlin also pointed out in his monologue, so now you've got a household of stuff. And even though you might like your house, you got to get a bigger one. You got to move. Why? Too much stuff. And that means that you got to move all your stuff, or maybe you put some of your stuff in storage. Storage. Imagine that. There's a whole industry based on keeping an eye on other people's stuff, says Carlin. And stuff, the accumulation of stuff, the abundance of stuff, and particularly the effort put forth in acquiring and maintaining all that stuff, as it turns out, is at the very heart of this morning's gospel, and actually all the lessons as well. Once when asked to settle a dispute between two brothers over the family inheritance, Jesus, as we heard, responded, "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." The Greek word for greed here actually means grasping for more. I kind of like that mental picture. Moreover, Jesus then went on to tell the parable of the rich man whose land had produced abundantly, so abundantly, in fact, that he thought to himself about tearing down his barns and building larger ones, which would then allow him to relax, to eat, drink, and be merry. But God comes to him and says, "This night your life is being demanded of you. And the things that you prepared, whose will they be?" To which Jesus offers the sobering observation, "So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." The well-known pastor George W. Truett was once invited to dinner at the home of a very wealthy man in Texas. And after the meal, the host led him outside to a place where they had an excellent view of the surrounding area. And pointing to the oil wells punctuating the landscape to the north, the wealthy man boasted, "25 years ago I had nothing. Now, as far as you can see in that direction, it's all mine." And looking to the south, to the opposite direction, at his sprawling fields of grain, he said, "That's all mine." And now turning to the east, toward a huge herd of cattle, he bragged, "They're all mine." And then finally pointing to the west and the beautiful forests, he exclaimed, "And that's all mine too." And he then paused, apparently expecting Dr. Truett to compliment on his great success and his abundance of possessions. Truett, however, placed one hand on the man's shoulder and with the other pointed heavenward. And he simply said, "Now, how much do you have in that direction?" And the man hung his head and confessed, "I never thought about that." Paul, writing in our second reading from Colossians, put it this way, "So if you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth." And as the Apostle Paul also noted in our second reading, greed is simply a form of idolatry. That is, when the things we like so much, in other words, our stuff, actually become our God, little g. And the true God, big G, the true God of our lives, gets squeezed out in the process. Years ago, there was a couple in one of my congregations who seemed to have it all. They were young and healthy. They both had good jobs. They owned their own home, enjoyed a comfortable upper middle class lifestyle. Moreover, they were also the new parents of this beautiful baby girl. What more could anyone want, I thought to myself as I sat in their living room during a visit. But sadly, it turned out that it was not enough. For during that very same visit, they shared with me how they had just invested in a company that marketed filters that could be attached to your kitchen sink in order to purify the tap water. That was harmless enough, I thought. After all, there's nothing wrong with making investments or having another business on the side. But then the husband said something that sent chills running up and down my spine. Obviously proud of their entrepreneurial efforts, he said matter-of-factly, and with his wife smiling and nodding in agreement, "I don't know when it will be," he said, "but someday we're going to be rich. I have no doubt about it. It's just a matter of time." And I left that evening thinking to myself, here this young, good-looking couple already has more than most people have, more than enough, one would certainly think, to make them happy and content. But apparently it wasn't enough for them. Instead of enjoying the life they already had, they were spending all their time and energy dreaming about a life that they wanted and hoped to have, and yet maybe never would. Sadly, not long afterwards, I learned that this couple had invested their entire life savings in this water filter company, but somehow the deal had gone bad, and as a result, they lost their home. The nice little life they had made for themselves, they ended up moving out west to start out all over again. Unfortunately, they were young enough to do so, but I still wondered if they ever found contentment. Then a few years later, at our daughter Christian's wedding, we heard from some of our friends that this couple had ultimately divorced. Again, they seemed to have had it all, but because it wasn't enough, Because they were so focused on attaining their dream of financial wealth, in the end, they lost everything, even each other. Again, our gospel reading this morning tells a similar cautionary tale. Prompted by that question about a family inheritance, Jesus had told that parable about a rich fool who was so focused on material success and prosperity that he was blinded by it. And when his land produced abundantly, all he could think about was building larger barns and then being able to relax, to eat, drink, and be merry. But this rich fool, as we heard, suddenly dies. God says to him, all these things you've prepared, whose will they be now? Therefore, Jesus' point in telling the story is crystal clear. One's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And then there was Howard Hughes. Perhaps you've heard of him. All he ever wanted in life was more. He wanted more money, so he parlayed inherited wealth into $1 billion pile of assets. He wanted more fame, so he broke into the Hollywood scene and soon became a famous producer and filmmaker. He wanted more pleasures, so he paid handsome sums to have a revolving door of beautiful starlets at his disposal. He wanted more thrills, so he designed, built, and piloted the fastest aircraft in the world. He wanted more power, so he secretly dealt political favors so skillfully that members of Congress and even a couple of presidents virtually became his pawns. All he ever wanted was more. In fact, he was absolutely convinced that more would bring him true satisfaction. Unfortunately, history shows otherwise. Hughes spent the last 15 years of his life addicted to drugs, too weak in the end to even administer the shots to himself. His 6'4" frame had shrunk to 6'1", and he weighed only 90 pounds at his death. He concluded his life as an emaciated shell of the former man, a pale, shrunken body, fingernails which had grown into hideous, inches-long corkscrews, rotting black teeth, tumors, and of course, innumerable needle marks from his drug addiction. Not only that, but not a single acquaintance or relative mourned his passing. It was written at the time that the only honor he received after he died was a moment of silence in the Las Vegas casino where he had taken up residence and then spent the final years of his sad, broken life in seclusion. But even that tribute was short-lived, apparently. A Time magazine article noted that after the prescribed moment of silence for Hughes in the casino, a pit boss looked at his watch, leaned forward, and announced, "Okay, roll the dice. He's had his minute." David Butrick once said, "Our lives are as brief as the hyphen between the dates on a gravestone." In other words, the point is not how long we live, but how well we live. Better yet, how fully we live between the hyphen. Jesus lived a mere 33 years on this earth, but he lived it fully, giving glory to God by his faithful and loving obedience. And it's that kind of fullness and abundance that Jesus calls us, following where he himself has led the way. James Dobson tells the following story. When my daughter Danny was a teenager, she came home one day and said, "Hey, Dad, there's a great new game out. I think you'll enjoy it. It's called Monopoly." I just smiled. We gathered the family together and set up the board. It didn't take the kids very long to figure out that their old dad had played the game before. I soon owned all the best properties, including Boardwalk and Park Place. I even had Baltic and Mediterranean. My kids were squirming, and I was loving every minute of it. About midnight, I foreclosed on the last property, and I did a little victory dance. My family wasn't impressed. They went to bed, made me put the game away by myself. And as I began putting all my money back in the box, a very empty feeling came over me. Everything I had accumulated was gone. The excitement over riches was just an illusion. And then it occurred to me, hey, this isn't just a game of Monopoly that's caught my attention. This is the game of life. You sweat and strain to get ahead, but then one day after a little chest pain or a wrong change of lanes on the freeway, the game ends. It all goes back into the box. You leave this world just as naked as the day you came into it. I once saw a bumper sticker, says Dobson, that proclaimed, "He who dies with the most toys wins." That's wrong. It should say, "He who dies with the most toys dies anyway." In other words, an abundant life. The abundant life promised by Jesus does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Instead, a truly abundant life is living fully in the present, enjoying the blessings of each new moment, each new day, each new season or stage of life as they occur, and whatever they may be. More stuff will never make us happier. And fewer possessions will never make us less happy. Not if we're rich toward God, focused